Welcome to Massey College. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers and I'm the principal of Massey College. Its directrice principale. Massey College is built on Indigenous land, the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We want to acknowledge their stewardship of the land and express our gratitude for the ability of everyone to be here to study the role of the media in this pandemic. So welcome to the second Canadian German Media Symposium on facts, feelings, and the value of truth, a mid-pandemic look at the media. This symposium is held virtually because of the pandemic, but I want to acknowledge the support of our partners to undertake this activity. The symposium is part of a very special relationship that Massey College has with the German Embassy and the German Consul General in supporting the Southern Journalism Fellowships. And every year we're trying to reflect a little bit on the role of the media in a democracy, its strengths, its challenges, its success, its failures, and we want to continue to do that as Massey has been supporting journalism for over 25 years with the Southern Journalism Fellows. I'm very pleased that today we will look at what the impact of the pandemic. And I want to thank the German Embassy and the German Ambassador, Sabine Sparwasser, and the Consul General, Thomas Schulz, for their continued support and friendship. I also want to acknowledge the support of the University of Toronto Communications team for their support and involvement in this program. So this program, again, facts, feelings, and the value of truth, will examine a couple of things. First, we will hear from observations of a Canadian journalist in Germany. And then in part one, we will talk a little bit about the role of media in divisive societies. Not Your Enemy is the title of this part. The second part will be about how do we report on social inequalities in times of a pandemic. A very important subject for all of us. So let me first pass the virtual mic to the Consul General, who is been in his position in Toronto since September 2018. He's legally trained and he has a long career in the German Foreign Service that brought him all over Europe, most recently as German ambassador to Croatia. He's held position in Turkey and Riyadh and was part of the reconstruction team in Afghanistan. Consul General.
Hello everybody. Willkommen and welcome to the German Canadian Media Symposium 2020, our first virtual one. A very warm welcome to our distinguished German and Canadian panelists, Roland Nellis, Chief Correspondent of German news magazine Der Spiegel, who is joining us from Washington, D.C., and is surely among those people who didn't get much sleep recently. So Roland, many thanks for joining us after these extremely busy days. Welcome as well to Gemma Pyriksen, a freelance journalist who worked for Frankfurter Rundschau, German Radio Deutschlandfunk, amongst others. Gemma is also one of the co-founders of Reporters Without Borders Germany. She is joining us from Berlin. Good evening and thank you, Gemma. Welcome as well to Sadie Ansari, a Canadian freelance journalist who is on research right now in Berlin. Leslie Young, an Emmy Award-winning documentary producer and current Massey Fellow, and a special hello and thank you to Jessica Johnson for taking on the surely not easy role as moderator today. Jessica, you certainly do not need any further introduction as the executive editor of one of Canada's finest magazines. An event like this would not be possible without our great partners. So thank you to Massey College and University of Toronto Communication for supporting and helping us to realize even our craziest ideas. We couldn't have done this without you. It is always such a pleasure working together. You might share my impression that more than ever, over the last few weeks, we all leaned heavily on reliable information, input based on solid journalism. Fact, feelings, and truth. The title of our symposium came into my mind several times while the developments in the US were unfolding, changing, and escalating. We all witnessed unprecedented American elections, the highest voter turnout ever, and at the same time, two completely different narratives, with a significant amount of voters obviously in disbelief of fact-based reporting and math of the classical US news channels. So our topic seems to be at the very core of current issues. What is the media's role in times dominated by a pandemic that seems to amplify existing economic and societal inequalities, sharpened by political landscapes that seem to produce divisive societies? And where does this leave our so cherished democracies? To quote my boss, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, social divisions are growing in our countries. Getting to the root of these developments is one of the greatest tasks for the future. This will be easier if we tackle them together, if we listen to each other better and learn from each other again, just as partners and friends do. We're truly grateful to tackle this with Canada as a friend and partner. The challenges Canadians face are pretty much the same Germans and Europeans are confronted with. It is more important than ever for like-minded countries, universities, and media outlets to seek out alliances and support collaboration. That is the best way to forge meaningful, long-term partnerships through research, personal connections, and common goals. And we are, both Canada and Germany, fortunate to live in liberal democracies committed to freedom of the press. However, we need to be vigilant. Let's face it, populist movements are trying in many different ways to discredit serious and reliable media, to spread their own narratives, or should I say alternative facts. This might even endanger democracy if parts of our populations don't even try anymore to get the bigger picture, but are happy with what they get from their sort of parallel universe. How to reach these people? How to get serious information to them? That is precisely why we need to talk and to discuss. One tangible example for supporting serious and critical journalism is the Arthur F. Burns Fellowship and Award. It is my great honor and pleasure to use today's symposium to present the 2020 Arthur F. Burns Award to Josh O'Kane. Josh O'Kane covers Canadian technology news as well as small and medium businesses affected by the coronavirus crisis for the Globe and Mail. Josh was a 2019 Arthur F. Burns Fellow with the International Center for Journalists, reporting on technology and politics from the Berlin newsroom of Handelsblatt, and has returned to Germany several times on research after that. He is awarded the Arthur F. Burns Award presented by German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas for his article, "Germany Takes on Big Tech, Inside the Fight to Curb the Power of Global Data Giants," a very timely observation on Germany's approach to maintain data protection as one of the leading privacy and data protection countries in the world. Congratulations to you, Josh, for your journalistic achievements and paving the way for substantial journalism in challenging times.
Thank you very much, Consul General. The Arthur F. Burns Fellowship was a fantastic chance to immerse myself both in a subject and in a place for 2 months. I see my job as a journalist as a chance to show people how the world around them works, and particularly in Canada, we sometimes limit our attempts at understanding of that world to what happens in the United States. Now, I believe one of the biggest frontiers worth exploring as a journalist is our relationship with digital technology and how the concentration of power among digital giants affects our day-to-day lives. Germany is one of the leading countries in the world in its critical approach to these large private companies and sets an example of questioning the extent of their role in our lives. I was thrilled to spend 2 months examining the reasons behind this in order to show Canadians that there are ways to interact with Silicon Valley giants on your own terms. I'd like to thank the International Center for Journalists and the International Journalisten Programme for having me on the fellowship. And thank you once again, Consul General, and your team at the Federal Foreign Office for recognizing my reporting on the issue. I look forward to watching the rest of the symposium. Thanks.
Congratulations to Josh O'Kane, and thank you to the Consul General and to Principal de Rosier for that very warm and inspired welcome. We have an ambitious agenda today, both in subject matter and in the richness of the range of perspectives that we're going to share. It is all linked around the common theme of the polarization of our society. And we have just gone through a year of incredible change, challenge, and growth. We have a few journalists that are going to be participating in a conversation. First, I'm going to send the conversation to a colleague in Germany. Sadie Ansari is someone that I've had the pleasure to meet when she is here in Canada, but she is currently based in Germany. I'm just going to give you her biographical details here. Sadie Ansari is a Pakistani-Canadian journalist whose work often covers race and immigration. She has appeared in The Guardian, Vice, Maclean's, and the Globe and Mail, among other outlets. Sadia's investigative reporting work has sparked legislative change. She is co-founder of Canadian Journalists of Color, an important organization here right now, and holds a master's in journalism from UBC and a master's of public administration from Queen's University. Sadia, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us today.
I'm Sadie Ansari. I'm a Canadian journalist currently in Berlin. So I've spent about half of this pandemic in Germany and the earlier half of this pandemic I spent in Canada. A challenge that I've seen media facing in both countries with respect to covering COVID-19 is really reporting on and disputing misinformation that has deepened existing divisions and fractures in both societies, and certainly it's true across many different countries. We're in a moment as journalists where we must amplify public health messages while also remaining critical of the government and finding the balance that, where we're not fraying public trust in government, but we're also not fraying public trust in the media. And on the flip side, when we talk about misinformation, I think many of us are grappling with, how do you report on misinformation and the resistance to public health measures without legitimizing these things? One phenomenon that has put these large issues into focus for me is a resistance to public health measures like social distancing and masks. In Germany, there have been ongoing protests across the country since the spring, and this was very surprising for me because I thought, many people thought, and objectively Germany did, quite well managing their pandemic, especially in the spring. But the first protest here was in April, and about 50 people came out, and then in May, it spread to other cities, Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich. And in August, there were massive protests in Berlin. 38,000 people came out to one of them at the end of August. And just on Saturday in Leipzig, 20,000 people came out to a protest. So we're in light lockdown right now in Germany. And on Saturday, police said that 90% of those who showed up did not wear masks. And this is at a time where Germany is reporting record new infections. So not only is that alarming, but the protests actually became violent. So police said about 500 people were responsible for this violence. At its height, barricades were set on fire. 32 journalists were injured during the protests, and 31 emergency staff were injured. So things, I think it's fair to say things are getting out of hand. And this is not one group protesting. This is a broad coalition of groups. So there was a group called Lateral Thinkers that started in the spring, that started to organize these protests, but a broad coalition comes out, extreme right-wing groups, anti-vaxxers, people with large followings like vegan chef turned conspiracy theorist Attila Hildmann, some of the stuff you just can't even make up, honestly. So I think that this particular, movement is really challenging for media to cover. And I think there's three main challenges that German media is facing right now that I think when we look back at this, they're going to be real lessons for how to cover, divisive issues. So I think the first is that, there's this prevention paradox that Germany did so well in preventing, infections in the spring that it kind of fueled protesters' ideas that it's not a real problem. And now with new infections, that might be less of an issue, but I think that's certainly an interesting thing to try to have to cover. Second is understanding and explaining all these unlikely coalitions between these groups. Like what makes yoga mom who comes out to this protest with her kid feel comfortable, marching next to a neo-Nazi essentially. And then also there's untangling the difference between, legitimate political grievances, like, people worried about their job and the economy, and, some of the stuff that just seems like there are just agents of chaos trying to undermine democracy. And some of those groups are political parties themselves, it seems sometimes. So I think that, these are three major challenges that the German media is dealing with. And I'm really interested to see how this coverage will sort of continue and play out. And relevant to this is, I think, this larger question that we're asking ourselves in Canada and that we're going to be discussing likely at this forum, what is our role in bridging the gaping and growing divides that we see in our countries? I'm very interested to know what everyone else has been thinking about and how everyone else has been sort of trying to grapple with this question. And I really look forward to listening on the discussion that will follow this. Thank you.
So very good to have that perspective. And I should add, if you have comments or questions on any of the content you've seen so far and on what's coming up now, please do share your thoughts in the chat on YouTube. And you can also tweet to @Massey College with the hashtag GCMS 2020. Just to let us know you're out there and please join the conversation. So I'm Jessica Johnson. I'm the executive editor and creative director of The Walrus, which is Canada's leading general interest magazine and has a specific mandate, an educational mandate, but to cover Canada and its conversations. So this is very relevant to our discussion for me. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Roland Nellis, now to join us from Washington. Roland is the Washington bureau chief of Der Spiegel, has been in Washington since 2017, has been with Der Spiegel since 2002, and is a member of its editorial board. So Roland, welcome. And I echo the Consul General's comments. I hope that you've had a bit of time to recover from the US election last week.
Hi, Jessica, and thank you for having me here. I think that's a very good thing to have this symposium, although we are in the midst of a pandemic. Actually, I didn't have much time to recover due to everything that the President of the United States has been doing for the past couple of days. But it was a kind of interesting time, and it still is. Yeah, and I don't really, I get always questions of what do you think how this whole thing is going to play out? And I always say I'm optimistic. That everything is going to be just by the book and by the laws of the United States. But I don't really know in the end what's going to happen, because I've been surprised here for so many times that I'm really careful with predictions now.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of being a foreign correspondent in Washington during the Trump administration? What's your experience been? And for instance, have you been well treated?
Well, actually, so when I came here 3 to 4 years ago, all of my colleagues back in Germany were saying, yeah, that's so great that you're going to Washington and such an exciting time. And it's for journalists. It's really the best thing to report on. And we really envy you. And that is true in a way. But after 3 years now covering Donald Trump, mainly Donald Trump, I have to say it is also very exhausting, and it's also sometimes really painful also to see what's actually happening here with this president and to report on it, and it can be painful as well. I have been by the White House actually. Usually we foreign journalists, we have been treated as everybody else. So there was in between really bad and kind of also kind of kind in a way, because Donald Trump was always very kind to journalists when he wanted a lot of journalists in the White House to cover him and his big events. So these were always the times when his press people were also very kind to us, because they wanted a big audience, and they let everybody in. Also, foreign journalists like us were always admitted to these big events when he was shaking hands with foreign leaders and things like that. So it was a kind of, this and that. And then I have to say, they always made sure that all the journalists had access to his big rallies out in the country. And I attended plenty of them to report on these rallies. And we were always welcome to cover these rallies, but not because they liked us, but because they wanted to please Donald Trump's ego. And he was always really happy when he had many cameras and many journalists there. And of course, we knew that, and I always pointed that out in my reporting. But it was kind of, they were giving us access in this sense, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit what the coverage of Trump has been in Germany? How does your reader respond to what you are doing, knowing that it's a different audience than maybe what the people who are watching this right now would know?
Well, the interest in Germany for Donald Trump and for everything that's happening in the US is huge. I mean, it's really incredible. We can see that from the page views on our website. They always go through the roof every time we report on Donald Trump and everything he's doing. So I think it's even bigger, the interest, than in some other European countries, like France, for example. And my only explanation for this is that somehow the Germans, they've always been fascinated by the United States. The United States have always been the big brother for West Germany after the war. And it was always a very important state everybody kind of looked to in the sense of what's going to happen with the world. And so there's also a sense in Germany that, because of our past, a lot of people in Germany are very sensitive to everything that's happening here, that might kind of go to an authoritarian regime. And so a lot of Germans always look at the United States and say, okay, is that already something that might remember us of our own past, or is there something going on that happened in Germany a couple of decades ago? So there's also this sense that everybody's really aware of what's going on with democracy, and whether democracy is in danger or not. So I think these are the main reasons why everybody is really interested in what's happening over here in the States.
It sounds like you're feeling quite a holistic audience, or a united audience. One of the trends, of course, that we've seen since 2016 is the polarization of US media, such that there's left-wing reality and right-wing reality, and even different outlets, and the concept of alternative facts. Is there an equivalent climate like that in Germany?
I think it's not really comparable. I think one of the main differences between Germany's media landscape and the American media landscape, or the media landscape in the US, is this huge amount of cable news networks in the United States with opposing views, like Fox News and CNN, MSNBC. We don't have that in Germany. I mean, it's nothing like that. There is a polarization, light, I would call it, in the newspaper landscape in Germany. So we have newspapers that might be more conservative, more friendly also to the presidency here in the United States, like the Bild Zeitung, for example. And then there are other newspapers like mine, or Der Spiegel, or Süddeutsche Zeitung, for example, that are much more critical, of course, towards the U.S. administration of this time. So no, I wouldn't say that it's that there is much of a comparison here. But I was fascinated to see this partisanship in the United States, especially in these cable news networks. I've never seen anything like that before. Shows like Sean Hannity or Ingraham putting out, right lies and crazy stuff the president has said on the one hand, and then CNN, MSNBC kind of standing up for the values of the United States and the democracy here. So that was really fascinating to see how that all played out in the past years.
And it's interesting, so much attention focused around one individual. I realize we've just been talking about Trump, and I'm like, wow. Is this something that you think will continue? Or have we reached a sort of equilibrium or peace now, even knowing that the outcome is likely to be kicked around a little bit for the next while?
Well, honestly, when I was referring to why it's kind of exhausting reporting on Trump, I think for me personally, there was one thing that I really found horrible, that this man really sucks all the air in, the media attention, tries to get all the media attention. A lot of media is focused on him and only on one person and what he's doing. And you can see that right now, again, it's happening again. I mean, he's doing all this big theater about the election that's supposed to be stolen, and everybody seems to be focusing on this. And at the same time, you have the pandemic getting worse and worse in the United States, and this is actually something everybody should be focused on, a real issue everybody should be focused on, and especially an issue he and his administration should be focused on for the remainder of their term. And then just not doing it. Instead, he's just kind of playing out all these grievances, and it's horrible to see that. And this is really something I really can't stand anymore. And I think a lot of Canadians feel the same.
Yeah, it sounds like you'd probably love to write about something else. Climate, I don't know. I know. Well, one of the big themes that's been coming up immediately lately is about the whole notion of objectivity, because I think the New York Times was really surprised by the outcome of the election the first time, and then really looked at its own reporting. And are you able to distinguish between reporting and opinion in your work? Because I think North American media really seems to be drawing a line in the sand between opinion and analysis. Or do you have different sort of regulations around that for what you do?
Yeah, this might be surprising for a North American audience, but actually in Germany, it can be that the guy like me who reports on what's happening in the White House can also be the same guy that writes the opinion piece on the Trump administration. So there is not this kind of a strict firewall between reporting and opinion pieces. But of course, we try to, or what we do is in our reporting, we try to deliver the facts and stay to the facts and try to give everything an angle, of course. But the opinion side would be left to the opinion pieces. That's something we are trying to do. And the Der Spiegel has always been a magazine that's in a tradition of trying to put a perspective to everything. So it's also in our reporting, we always have a special angle on everything we report on. And so this is a kind of tradition we have here at Der Spiegel, and I'm following this tradition as well in my reporting.
One of the things that some journalists find is that the social media climate is almost as loud as the actual media climate. How much does that enter into your work? Do you ever feel that you're hindered or unable to say what you really think because of the backlash that you might get?
No. So what I do is I have a Twitter account, but I don't tweet myself. I only use it to look what everybody else is doing and to gather information, because my experience is that it's unhealthy to engage too much on Twitter, I don't like all this trolling, and I'm trying to stay out of it, and I try to ignore the trolls as well. I get a lot of emails because my email is up on our website. So every time I write a piece, I get a lot of positive commentaries from our readers, but I also get very, very hard to digest emails from readers that are very aggressive, and they're even threatening to me. And but I have, in German we say, I have I have a fat cover here on my shoulders. That means I have a kind of, I'm used to that, and so I don't get intimidated, and I just shrug that off. And I'm after a couple of years in this job, you get to live with that, and I'm sure you do that as well.
I'm working on that part. It's really valuable to have your perspective. And Roland is going to stay with us. I'm going to invite two other journalists to join us right now as we shift the conversation slightly to the coverage of the pandemic and some of the issues that have arisen in the last year. First of all, Leslie Young, an Emmy Award-winning journalist with a wide range of experience, especially rooted in digital. Most recently, Leslie's been a health specialist for Global News, so she'll have some insights on the pandemic for sure. She's a current Massey Fellow. And Leslie has also taught data journalism workshops for Journalists for Human Rights. Also joining us is Gemma Pyriksen. Gemma is a Berlin-based journalist specializing in Eastern Europe. Thank you for joining us at what is a later time for you. Gemma has a very established career, currently working for the esteemed German radio outlet Deutschlandfunk Kultur. Gemma is one of the co-founders of Reporters Without Borders Germany, where she serves as a board member. Thank you so much for joining us, Leslie and Gemma, and maybe we'll get all of us together on screen now. One of the first questions I wanted to throw out there is that we're all covering different cultures, different climates. We have Canada, the US, and Germany on the call. And with this topic of social inequity, I was wondering if Leslie and Gemma, you could first both speak to how that's playing out in your market. What are some of the issues that have come up in the last year, and what trends are you seeing? So Leslie, maybe you'd like to take that first, and then we'll go to Germany.
The very beginning of the pandemic, our focus was mostly on what is this virus, what should you do about it, just sort of very practical advice. And that was a lot of the tone of a lot of the coverage for the first little while. But after that, it quickly became apparent that the pandemic was actually exacerbating a lot of existing social issues in Canada. So we started to see divisions along income. We started to see divisions along race. We've seen divisions on age too. So of course, it's been pretty tragic what's happened in our long-term care homes. And these are issues that we knew about. They've been reported on before, but the pandemic has really brought this out. And we're seeing sort of increasing coverage on this as the divisions start to worsen, I suppose.
I would agree to what Leslie said, but I think now it's very much a parallel reporting, because on the one hand, we have a lot of experts in the German media, like virologists and people who are experts on epidemics. And on the other hand, we see that that actually the pandemic is a magnifying glass for a lot of social problems. And I think it's very good that media start now to focus more on these issues, because you see there in Germany, for example, there are a lot of people on short work at the moment, and this has a lot of consequences for their working life, and people are, for example, nurses and also cashiers were people who were working constantly and who didn't have a lot of attention before the pandemic. And we had a kind of campaign coming up in the time of the pandemic where actually people were clapping for nurses, for cashiers, and we spoke about professions which are actually relevant for the system. And this was a very new, I think, approach to look at some professions who have been very much in the shadow of the attention of the media, which are mainly also professions which are female professions, especially nurses and cashiers. And there is a kind of sort of different perspectives, I think, on a lot of jobs and now.
It's interesting that it's so many different forms of inequity, race, obviously, social class, gender, demographics. Why do you think this is happening now? As you say, these have been issues that have been around forever, but now they're on the part of the national conversation, and anyone can take that.
I think it might just simply be because people are dying. These are issues where these are groups that are disproportionately impacted. And when we say disproportionately impacted, we mean they're sick and they're dying. And this, it's hard to ignore. And it's something we definitely need to tackle.
And I think there's more sensibility also in some of the newsrooms, how we should report, because on the one hand, it's much more virtual, like we are meeting here as well, only online. So a lot of journalists sit at home, they're in a home office, myself in home office since March, for example. And this means that we have less people going somewhere and report and really meeting people. We had a first phase when we had a lot of expert interviews because they were easy to reach. They were in home office as well. And I think there's, because I see it in the debates in our newsrooms, that there's more sensibility that we need actually to have other people in the media as well, and that we shouldn't speak about people, but more with people. And for example, yesterday in one of the main news shows in German TV, we had a very young guy who was actually finishing school, and I'm sure he was the first time in such a prominent news show, to tell how he's feeling actually now finishing school in times of pandemic, and how it is actually for pupils in school to be in such a situation. And I think that's a very good and important trend in the media, that we try to get people also on the screen, which we haven't seen for quite a while.
How good a job do you think the media has done at covering these inequities, as well as realizing its own role in the problem, you know? Anyone, please feel free to answer that.
I think it's difficult to generalize this, because I think there have been very good reports and also bad ones. I mean, as it is always. And but I think it's also a chance for a lot of topics to come up now, and especially to have a deeper look into social problems we have in the society. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think it's getting better. I think at the beginning it was very chaotic from a reporting standpoint. There was so much information out there. There were so many public health messages that we really had to try to get across. And now we've been living with it for a while. We've got a chance to really look into these things in a more in-depth sort of way, and people are starting to do that. I mean, if you're interested in some great Canadian reporting, look at today's Toronto Star and the number of reports about migrant workers, about provincial plans, and so on. There's a lot of in-depth reporting out there right now about these issues.
Roland, do you think the American media is changing as a result? I mean, the shooting of George Floyd in the summer really was a turning point around the world, I think, but especially in the United States, about the conversation it was having with itself. Like, what is that? Are we learning, or what does that represent?
I think so, yes. I think it has changed after the George Floyd's death, but it has also changed after the 2016 election, when a lot of media outlets didn't get the rise of Donald Trump right, and they didn't see that coming. And after that, they invested heavily in doing more reporting out in the countryside and sending out reporters to the country. And after the death of George Floyd, there was also a growing awareness for the issues that that are happening in the Black community. And so, yes, it has changed quite a bit, I guess. Yeah.
I can't help but saying that, of course, one of the problems with the media is its whiteness, and there's 4 white people on this call. I think, are we seeing temporary change right now at which things will go back to normal? Or do you think that this is the changes of the past year and the pandemic, is this really going to be with us permanently? Leslie, what do you think? You're sort of studying this right now, so taking a step out of the fray, I guess.
Well, yeah, as an outside observer now and not actively putting stories out every day, I really hope it changes. I know the media has actually been facing a lot of challenges as well recently. There have been a lot of layoffs. There are fewer people out there doing these stories. And of course, we have the challenges that Gemma was talking about, where company policies are staying at home, and that makes it harder to reach people who aren't also at home. But yeah, I really hope it changes. We're really seeing a lot of things come out that need to be changed, whether it's addressing race or income inequality or ageism in our society.
Gemma, maybe you could just paint a picture for us of, like, it's hard to have these cross-cultural conversations without knowing everyone's reading the same things and talking about the same things. But what was the response in the German media? I think you have some really interesting insights on like working from home and just who has really been most affected by the pandemic and who's borne the brunt of that. Is that a major theme in the German media of the pandemic?
Yes, it has been a big topic, and I think in the beginning there was also some misunderstanding because we as journalists were sitting at home, so we thought everybody's sitting at home, and we had, I think, too many stories on on actually this kind of work, not seeing that there were most of the people still going to work and not sitting at home, and I think that was a wrong perspective in the very beginning, but. We see now that there is a big political discussion because our social democrats have some plans that there should be a right for home office, and this is very much disputed because a lot of companies wouldn't like to agree. On the other hand, we see that other companies are already thinking about having to pay less rent for big offices because everybody is sitting at home anyway. And I think this is also not an easy solution because it makes it, for example, much more difficult for trade unions to get their politics together if everybody is isolated at home and only virtual connected. And not everybody is sitting in a big office like I do here because I'm a freelancing journalist. I was used to work at home anyway. But a lot of people are just sitting at home at a small kitchen table with children around or with very small apartments, especially, for example, in my profession even. You see also the big difference between some freelancers, especially young ones, who have perhaps only one room to work and to sleep and so on, and others who have an apartment with a bigger room where they can work. So you see there's some social injustice also in the kind of home office you have. And I think it's an important discussion. I'm sure you have it in Canada as well, but I wouldn't be too optimistic that it's a solution for everybody to be in home office.
It's true. In Toronto, my impression has been it's one city, two pandemics. Some people are relatively unaffected, and other people who live in denser housing or live with a roommate or just work in high-risk facilities, they're just having a much different time. We're getting some really good questions now, so and it's a good time to introduce questions into this. So I'm just going to ask the first one, which is from Elena Ferranti. Are trolls scaring away good journalism from social media? And I don't know if anyone here has experience of trolling or online bullying and how that might affect their work. But if anyone wants to speak to that, I think it's good to get to it. Leslie, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I have to say, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were talking to me.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I've had some experience with it. I have to say, as the pandemic went on, and I started my fellowship in September, so I sort of stopped reporting around that time. But over the course of the summer, people got angrier. I got more and more comments on social media, and angrier ones than for pretty much anything I wrote about the virus. And some of it was related to misinformation, saying this is all a hoax, that kind of thing. You know, shame on you for spreading these lies, those kinds of comments. There was a lot of that. I have to say, when you see, I react very differently to social media comments depending on their content. There are some people who obviously are trolling, and that doesn't bother me so much. If they're pointing out legitimate shortcomings in my work, I mean, that bothers me, and it should. So I try to address them, but sometimes you can tell just from the tone and the number of swear words involved how seriously you should take the comments.
Would you all say that trust in media has gone up or down in the last year?
The interesting thing in Germany, it has gone up again, because we had a huge discussion about mistrust in media, and a big discussion about something we call a Lügen, or not we call, but we were actually said that we would be Lügenpresse, which means lying press. It was actually around the crisis and the war in Ukraine, where we had a really big discussion about this. But now in the pandemic, the interesting thing is that you see that actually more and more people are interested in really good information. So, for example, our public media, they have really high viewer numbers now, and also the circulation of newspapers is rising, and you see as well that especially online is really very successful, even with young people who tend not to be with traditional media so much. But on the other hand, this doesn't help the economic crisis of media, because the business models are in danger already for a long time. But now we had some months where really big and important newspapers lost their advertising up to 70%, which really endangers a lot of media. So you see, it's a very difficult and mixed situation. Mistrust doesn't mean in every case that you earn the money you need to do quality journalism.
Here's a related question I'm just going to throw back to you. This is from Martin Hoffman. In Canada and the US, worries about the future of news media are increasing. We've had more layoffs and closures this year. Outlets close or get smaller. Germany is not at the same stage yet. Does the future look better there, or is Germany just a few years behind? I don't know if, Roland, maybe you can speak to that too, but it's really an existential struggle here. Is that true everywhere?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, it looks like especially the pandemic is taking some toll on the German media landscape. That's true. I mean, nobody can really tell what's going to happen next year or the year after, but the outlook is not really good so far. And we have had a rough time in the German media landscape for a couple of years now. And there have been layoffs, and a lot of newspapers had to lay off people, and there were mergers, and basically there were the same things happening that were taking place all over the world, I guess. And on the other hand, you have in Germany, you have a very strong public broadcasting situation. So we have very strong public broadcasting institutions. and they are funded through, I mean, not really through taxes, but kind of taxes. Everybody is paying for them, and so they are still able to do a great job there, and they still have a lot of resources, and that's a good thing. And I think it shows now, especially in these times, that in Germany it's good to have a system like that, with public broadcasting that is funded through this kind of systems. Although there are many people that are criticizing this, but I think it's a good thing to have that now.
Yeah.
But there's one part of journalism which is very much endangered, I think. That's actually foreign reporting, because it's very expensive to have correspondents everywhere, for example, and we had already a crisis for the last years. But now with the pandemic, I think this is getting even worse, because one thing is that there are a lot of travel restrictions to many countries, and also travel restrictions by the media itself. People get very much used to kind of internet research. So you have already some newspapers in Germany where people just sit in Berlin and they write about Russia or Libya or whatever, but haven't been there. And this is something I'm really concerned about, because I could imagine that even when the pandemic is over, there could be some people who would like to spare some money in the publisher house say, okay, you don't need to travel. We saw in the pandemic that we can report on this country already, also from Germany. So that's really concerning, I think.
That's a really good point. I know when the pandemic hit, for us, we had a number of stories that were pulled or put on hold because, or, travel stories that were converted into desk stories just because that was the way that they were going to get done. This is a really good discussion. I think we have about 10 minutes left, and if you have a question, please do ask it now. I'd like to turn to this other one. This is from Lauren Salim. I imagine there's been a workload increase with all the misinformation and disinformation during the pandemic. What role does the media have in fact-checking the information that's out there? I want to just speak to the process of fact-checking, which has a bunch of connotations, because we've seen a journalist like Daniel Dale now with CNN, whose job is just to keep track of everything President Trump says that's wrong. Obviously, there's also fact-checking, which is the type that we do at the Walrus, which is a person going through and verifying every quote and source that's in an article before publication. What is your experience with fact-checking? Do you think that that's kind of like the key role that we have right now? I didn't frame that well. I'm
say it's one of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there.
No, I just said I didn't. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's definitely a very important role. I know when it came to the science side of reporting, there was a lot of misinformation out there about cures, which we obviously don't have. Some of that came from the president. And I mean, if President Trump is talking about taking a miracle drug to cure coronavirus, you kind of have to address that. So we did devote quite a lot of time. And I have to say the whole newsroom ended up pitching in the early stages of the pandemic. There was very little other news, I suppose, that we were addressing. So there were a lot of resources that we were able to dedicate to fact-checking, as well as all the other pandemic-related stories.
I would imagine in the health industry, well, in the health beat especially, that's a real concern. First of all, the miracle cures, but then all the stuff around vaccines and anti-vaxxing and who's going to get the vaccine. Yeah, I don't know.
So, I mean, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I think the fact-checking has really improved over the past couple of years, especially with Donald Trump being president. A lot of media outlets have gotten used to do these kind of formats as well, and that's a real plus, I guess. Here at Der Spiegel, for example, we have a lot of specialists that are specialized in fact-checking, and we also have people that have a doctor's degree that used to work in the medical field. And so we were really lucky to have these experts right at hand as soon as the pandemic broke out, to do a lot of fact checking, do a lot of really good reporting on this. But I guess this is not everywhere the same, and so this is really important that media companies still have the resources and put the money in these kind of fact checking operations to keep the standard as high as possible.
Mm. I agree very much with what my colleague said, but if you remember what Sadie described so interestingly about our demonstrations we have in Germany at the moment, there are people who don't care about facts. So they don't care about fact checkers as well. And this I find really a disturbing problem, that you have, I don't know if it's a growing part of the society, but there is a part of society. And in Germany, it's an estimated 20%, which is not such a small figure, who have their own imagination of what is happening, and they don't believe that the coronavirus is as dangerous as we would see it. And a lot of them don't wear masks. So, for example, also in our everyday life, we see and meet people who are somewhere in the bus or where and don't wear a mask because they have a different opinion of what is happening at the moment. And I think that's a big challenge to us as media, but to us as citizens as well.
And you know, there, as you mentioned, there are some parallels with the anti-vaccine movement, which I've looked at in the past. And what people who study that movement tell me is that there are some people whose minds are very difficult to change, and they tend to be the most vocal. But there are a lot of people who simply have questions. And if you're able to approach them respectfully and not say, well, these people are crazy or that kind of thing, if you don't talk down to them, there actually is some ability to change people's minds.
Who do we think has been leading as the outlets in covering the pandemic? What are you following and going to?
What do you mean?
I'm asking partly because one of the things that's valuable to me about this conference is when you tell me more about the German media climate, because I don't necessarily know, and I think maybe it's a bit of a cross-cultural conversation as well. So I mentioned Daniel Dale because I think he sort of just picked a lane at a certain point and was like, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to just fact check the president. Every day I'm going to wake up and fact check the president. Is there anyone else like that you think has really emerged as sort of like a hero journalist of the last year or two?
We had a fascinating format, which was a podcast with one of the leading virologists in Germany. His name is Drosten. He's actually a man working in our important clinic here in Berlin and the Charité, and he was very much involved in actually being one of the main persons in the research about the virus. And he started in the very beginning a podcast with a journalist from the public broadcaster Norddeutscher Rundfunk, that's in the north of Germany, which was really very, very successful by reaching out to a lot of people. So there are millions of people who just subscribing this. And there he was explaining everything about the virus. And people were listening to him like every day. And I think that's what was a fascinating new format, which I don't know, which I found very important in this time to get really good, solid information of what was going on.
We have a question from Massey fellow Sean McAuliffe and journalist Sean McAuliffe, who has shared this. Writing about the pandemic has been a challenge. It shifts so much. As it gets worse, how does one increase the warning volume without losing people who tune it out? That's a really good point. Like, pandemic fatigue is a thing. So how do you keep how do you just keep going and keep delivering people when you're basically saying the same thing over and over again, like, wash your hands, wear a mask? Well, do you have anything on that? How have you handled the last while?
Yeah, well, I think one important point is that I think there is no real fatigue. I mean, there is a fatigue with the pandemic, but I think there is no fatigue in the interest of the readers in the stuff we are writing about the pandemic. So, for example, you have all this discussion around vaccines and what's going on there. So I think there is still a huge interest in everything that's happening in this part. And also, I think there is a lot of people. There are a lot of people that are really interested in getting deeper into the issues. It's not only consuming the fast news. It's also there are a lot of people that are really trying to understand what is going on and what is the backstory here. So I know there are many people in Germany and all over the country that want to ignore the facts and fall for lies. But I think there, in the most part, there are a lot of reasonable people that really try to follow the news and try to get a lot of as much information as possible. So I try to see it from a more optimistic side here. And there's one point I wanted to add, which we haven't talked a lot about, is the change in the policies of huge social media companies such as Twitter or Facebook regarding fake news and regarding lies by people like Donald Trump. So flagging this kind of misinformation um, uh, uh, by the social media companies is a really important step forward. I mean, it's not sufficient at all, and there are still a lot of lies out there on Facebook and Twitter that aren't fact checked and that aren't really controlled. But still, I mean, that's a huge step forward to where we were a couple of months ago.
It's true. Gemma or Leslie, do you want to add something about what keeps you going in this time?
I'd say maybe keep it fresh. It is important to keep reinforcing these basic public health messages, but the more we can avoid saying the same thing over and over, so finding new angles, finding new issues to talk about, because the pandemic affects everything. And I think that might be a way to try and keep things going.
And I think new developments are important. For example, the last days we had a lot of reporting about the vaccination. And actually, I was surprised myself because I thought it would be only possible in, I don't know, at the end of next year, whenever. And now we have a discussion which makes it perhaps possible, if we are lucky, that we have a vaccination also already in the beginning of the year. So I think that there's much more hope now that we will see an end to everything, but who knows?
That's a good note to end. I want to thank all of you so much for your time. I know how hard it is to be a journalist and then have to take a break to talk about what you do. Hopefully you found it as enriching as we all do, listening to your words. Thank you to the Consulate of Germany and to Massey College for making this conference possible once again. There was a time when it didn't look like it would be possible because of the pandemic, and we have found a way, obviously, to do it. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for your participation and your comments and questions. This is, of course, a much bigger community of many minds and meeting of cultures, and we are so glad to have been all together today in this way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Joseph Wong, and I am a professor at the University of Toronto, where I also serve as the interim Vice President International at the university. That was a terrific session. Fascinating to hear so many different perspectives from Berlin, from Washington, D.C., and here in Toronto, as we collectively reflect on facts, feelings, and truth during this mid-pandemic look at the media. On behalf of the University of Toronto and U of T Communications, a huge thank you to all of our guests, our online participants, our moderator, Jessica Johnson, for taking part in today's second annual German Canadian Media Symposium. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Consul General Thomas E. Schultz, as well as Principal of Massey College, Nathalie de Rosier, for their support of this terrific event. Now more than ever, during this time of heightened isolation due to the pandemic and the polarizing events south of the border and around the world, it's crucial that we come together. Never has it been clearer than the present that information is at the core of our global debates. Whether it be good information, misinformation, inconsistent information, scientific information, how we get our information, all of these factors determine how we have conversations around these very pressing global challenges. Indeed, we have so many challenges ahead around public health, around inclusivity, around equity, and indeed, the future of democracy. Keeping these conversations going is crucial, and that is part of the work that I do as Vice President International, seeking engagement with students, hearing from our researchers, as well as engaging the media across the world. I welcome further collaboration with Massey College, as well as the German Consulate, on this very important endeavor. Thank you so much again, and congratulations.
What a great symposium. Congratulations again to Jake O'Kane, the 2020 Arthur Burns Award recipient. And thank you to all of our participants, Jessica Johnson, Roland Nellis, Sadie Ansari, Gemma Pyriksen, and Leslie Young. Thank you very much to Joe Wang and U of T Communications team. And merci, dankeschön, thank you to the Consul General. And thank you as well to Massey's team, Emily Mockler and Matt Glanfield. And please continue to watch the programming at Massey. We continue to be involved on critical issues of today.